The rejection came quietly, like a door closing without a sound, yet it echoed louder than any shout ever could, because it carried the weight of hunger, responsibility, and a child waiting at home with hope in his eyes. He sat in the polished glass lobby of the towering corporate building, hands folded tightly over a worn folder that held his resume, his certificates, and the last fragile thread of belief that today might be different. The faces that had looked at him moments earlier were polite but distant, trained smiles masking instant judgment. Single father. Career gap. Outdated experience. Not a good fit. Those invisible labels hovered around him as he stood to leave, unaware that the next few seconds would turn his quiet humiliation into something no one in that building would ever forget. Before the story unfolds further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that one moment can change a life forever, please take a second to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to channel name to support stories that remind us of humanity. He walked toward the exit with slow, measured steps, each one heavier than the last, because every rejection felt less like a professional setback and more like a personal failure. Outside, the city moved on without noticing him, cars rushing past, people glued to their phones, ambition glowing in every direction except his. He thought of his small apartment, the unpaid bills stacked neatly on the table, and the lunchbox he had packed that morning with extra care so his daughter would not feel the scarcity he lived with every day. She was the reason he kept standing, the reason he ironed his only good shirt and practiced answers late into the night, and the reason rejection hurt so deeply. He had promised her things would get better, and with each failed interview, that promise felt more fragile. His journey had not always looked like this. Years ago, he had been known as a problem solver, someone colleagues trusted when systems failed or deadlines loomed. Then life happened suddenly and without mercy. The loss of his wife came like a storm that tore through every plan he had made, leaving behind grief he did not know how to carry and a tiny child who needed him more than he needed to collapse. He stepped away from his job to become everything at once: caregiver, protector, teacher, and emotional anchor. Time moved on, technology advanced, and the world he once belonged to did not wait for him to heal. The interview itself had been short and painfully efficient. The panel skimmed his resume, nodding politely, their eyes lingering on the gaps rather than the achievements. They asked safe questions, offered rehearsed responses, and ended the meeting with the familiar tone that signaled the inevitable. As he stood, thanked them, and turned away, he noticed a ripple of tension behind the glass walls of a nearby conference room. People were moving quickly, voices raised just enough to suggest urgency. Large screens glowed with complex charts and flashing alerts. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and it was written on every stressed face in that room. He paused, not out of curiosity but instinct, the kind that never leaves someone who has spent years fixing things before they break. As he passed the open doorway, his eyes caught a glimpse of the data streaming across the screens, patterns forming chaos where order should have been. His mind reacted before fear could stop it. He recognized the issue instantly, a cascading systems failure caused by a small overlooked variable that was multiplying at an alarming rate. It was the kind of problem he had once lived for, the kind that looked impossible until you knew exactly where to look. Inside the conference room, executives were scrambling, phones pressed to ears, assistants typing frantically, and at the center of it all was the CEO, a man whose reputation for brilliance and control was now cracking under pressure. A major deal was minutes away from collapse, millions on the line, and no one could stop the bleeding. The single father stood at the threshold, heart pounding, knowing he had no authority to speak, no invitation to interrupt, and nothing to lose. He cleared his throat, softly at first, then louder, until someone finally noticed him standing there. What happened next unfolded in seconds, yet those seconds carried the weight of years. He stepped forward, explaining the problem in simple terms, cutting through the noise and panic with clarity that came from lived experience rather than textbooks. He pointed to one line of data, then another, connecting dots others had missed because stress had narrowed their vision. His voice was calm, not because he lacked fear, but because this was familiar ground, a place where his mind felt steady even when everything else in his life felt uncertain. The room fell silent as he finished. Someone tested his suggestion. The system responded instantly, the error rate dropping, stability returning like a deep breath after near drowning. Screens shifted from red to green, alerts faded, and the deal that had been moments from disaster snapped back into place. Relief washed over the room, followed by disbelief. They stared at him, this man they had just dismissed as unqualified, outdated, and inconvenient, now standing as the reason their company had been saved. The CEO approached him slowly, studying his face with new eyes. This was not the polished confidence of someone accustomed to being right, but the raw respect of someone who had just witnessed unexpected brilliance. The rejection from minutes earlier dissolved into embarrassment and awe. In that moment, the labels placed on him shattered completely, replaced by a single undeniable truth. Talent does not disappear just because life gets hard. As the immediate crisis settled, the CEO asked about his background, his time away from the industry, and his current situation. The single father answered honestly, without embellishment or apology. He spoke of loss, responsibility, and resilience, of learning patience in hospital waiting rooms and strength in bedtime stories read through exhaustion. The room listened differently now, no longer scanning for weaknesses but recognizing depth. What followed was not just a job offer, but an acknowledgement of worth. The position was tailored to his strengths, flexible enough to honor his role as a father, and supported by a team that now understood what they almost lost by letting bias guide their judgment. He walked out of the building later that day not as a rejected applicant, but as someone restored, carrying an offer letter that meant stability, dignity, and a future he could finally believe in again. That evening, he returned home to his daughter with a quiet smile he had not worn in years. He made dinner, helped with homework, and tucked her into bed, knowing that tomorrow would still have challenges, but also knowing that hope was no longer something he had to pretend. It was real, tangible, and earned. The story spread quietly through the company, not as a headline, but as a lesson. Managers began looking twice at resumes with gaps, at candidates whose lives did not follow perfect lines. The CEO himself changed, carrying the memory of that day as a reminder that leadership is not just about vision, but about humility and listening. If this story has touched your heart, if it reminded you of someone you know or a moment you lived through, please take a moment now to like this video, share it, and subscribe to channel name so more stories like this can reach people who need them. And before this story ends, we have a special request for you. Please comment below with a single word that represents what this story made you feel, whether it is hope, strength, or belief. Because somewhere right now, a single parent is walking out of another rejection, carrying silent fears and unspoken courage, unaware that the very thing the world is overlooking might be exactly what it needs. Your engagement helps stories like this travel farther, reminding people that second chances are not gifts, but opportunities waiting to be recognized.